The Game Plan is a production of Disability Rights California, a space to strategize, organize, and posterize for the future of the disability rights movement. For more information on our work, please visit us at disabilityrightsca.org.
Welcome, everybody, to The Game Plan with Disability Rights California. My name is Eric Harris, and I am the Associate Executive Director of External Affairs at Disability Rights California. I'm really excited because today we have an amazing guest. His name is Roque Bucton. Welcome, Roque, to the show.
Eric, so good to be with you today. It's Roque Bucton here, and some greetings to the folks. Tao po. Just so happy to be on the pod and connecting with you all.
Absolutely. Well, we're so excited to have you. We're only in the beginning stages of the show, and we're really thrilled to have such amazing guests, including yourself. And let's get right into it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first, I'd love to know a little bit about Roque, especially young Roque, your background and kind of your youth. What are some of the things that you experienced as a young person growing up?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, so like what is now considered historic Filipino town. So
Mm.
I was first living above my dad's market in historic Filipino town as an infant. Um, and we bounced around a little bit in historic Filipino town, and then my dad and mom bought a house in what is now known as Koreatown, which before was known as the Latino Byzantine Quarter, because this was sort of the outskirts of the downtown LA. This was like the suburbs back in the late 1800s.
Wow.
And yeah, that was a really interesting experience. Um, it was not the greatest neighborhood, if you know what I mean. It was very culturally diverse,
Mm.
but a very poor neighborhood that, got even worse over time. There was lots of what we would call now disenfranchisement. We didn't have that term. It was just the hood back in the day.
Right.
Um, so that was sort of that, and those were like so very formative to like where I'm at now. There was lots of challenges growing up in that environment, and just general poverty, et cetera, et cetera. All
Mm.
those sorts of challenges in the ghetto. Very common experience amongst the poor. In the I was born in 64, so like I really grew up in the 70s, I'm like a 70s kid.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's interesting because I think, and you can, speak to this. When you're a kid, you kind of just you're living life as a kid. Did you really understand or did you process the challenges that were in your community, or was it just, yeah, this is just where I live. I'm with my friends, I'm with my family, and this is kind of how things are.
It was sort of a combination of that and also awareness because of like what was really around the
Mm.
area and the level of violence that was around the area. So, like as a kid, I got picked on just for going to school.
Mm.
Being an Asian, there was like, um, racism, like they would say like things like, like Chino, this or that, and then, bully you
Mm.
because you were not, like a Latino or something like that. It was just very, um, uh, like challenging to understand why people from your own neighborhood or your own community would, pick on you just because of your race. It's hard to process when you're a little kid, walking to school.
Yeah.
And I did have like a real revelation and insight, and this is very distinct to me when I was, I'd say maybe in the fifth grade. So I went to a small Catholic grammar school, and right next to it was a public park. And this public park was really, really bad. So there was graffiti everywhere. There was like, I don't know, people on different substances of different kinds, gang stuff. Just, it was a really intense location for like a little kid to kind of play in. This was a playground. Um, and I did have an insight one time, and I was like looking around at the environment, looking at all the crazy folks, like the graffiti, all that. And I said, I don't know if I'm going to make it out of here before I'm like 20 something years old. And I kind of made a vow to myself or to a divine essence and said, if I can get through this, I will transform my life and somehow like commit to being the best person I could be. And I remember that distinctly. It was almost like having an epiphany at a very young age about the reality that was around me, and that if I was fortunate enough to live through it, that it would be an opportunity to do something for the community.
Wow. Wow. Well, it sounds like even early on, you just had so many different experiences, whether it was the community that you were in, the schools that you went to, the epiphany that you just spoke about. What would you say, kind of all of those things contributed um, towards your political awakening, if you will, or kind of your entry into early advocacy?
I would say just the cultural differences within various communities. Like like I said, I'm just in this kind of community. But then I went to a Catholic high school, like a very wealthy
Mm,
Loyola high school,
mm,
and it was somewhat of a culture shock to be around folks that had such different lives. They, like my high school friends, they lived in very wealthy neighborhoods around LA. And when I would I mean, they were just my buddies, and we would go hang out, and I'd be like, wow, you live here? Like, this is amazing. Like, I can't believe you're going to school in my neighborhood, because Loyola was in that neighborhood. But the students who were there were from like extreme backgrounds. Like the things they would tell me their parents did were just like fantastic to me. Like they were like, how is that even possible?
mm,
Um, and I started really experiencing like the various cultural spaces that like LA had for the really the first time, because I was sort of just kind of really embedded in the Filipino community, the Latino community, just this kind of very local regional experience. And then meeting folks that were in my high school and hanging out with them where they lived, they were like at the beach in beachfront homes. They were like in these huge houses, things that I was just like, but the part that I really connected to was that they just accepted me as me. I was their friend. It was not a class thing. It was not, we just connected as people. And
mm,
so I thought that was like the real meaningful part. The other stuff was just like, wow, okay, this is like a very different upbringing and experience. And it did inform me that there are differences that um like differentiate, your life experience, your view, your perspectives, and that the things that I was experiencing were were subtly, informing me about what I wanted to do in life and what I wanted to do for the community, things that I wanted to become interested in. So that's just a bit of a pretext, but you could follow up if you wish.
No, I appreciate all that, Roque. And it's so fascinating. I mean, you can tell very early on that all of your experiences led to your growth and development. Um, One question that I have as a follow-up about, all of this, your disability identity, and kind of how that came about. All of us have a disability story. Um, what was it for you having the cultural elements, the community element, the poverty element, and then the unique perspective of being in a school that was as, kind of elite in terms of,
Mhm.
f financial elite levels. What was your experience early on with your disability?
Well, I was born with two disabilities.
Mm,
So one is a hidden one that like most people can't perceive, but I was born with like a crooked leg. Like my right leg bends at an odd angle.
mm,
And I remember when I could still see, I still had some eyesight when I was young. And I looked at some photos and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what are these weird shoes that I'm wearing in this photo? Like I'm a little kid. I was
mm.
like, what is this? She was like, oh, those are orthopedic shoes to help straighten your leg. And I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? Because I was just so used to being in my body, I didn't even perceive it per se as a young person.
Mm.
And then I was like, oh, wow, okay. The other disability is retinitis pigmentosa. So it's a genetic disorder and that affects the retina of the eye and it's progressive. So as a young person, I had really poor eyesight. And then I eventually started wearing really thick glasses. And then that kind of uh, got really severe in my mid 30s, let's say, like my eyesight really started degrading. Um, but that's really like the retinitis pigmentosa was really when I started dealing with disability. I went into the eye doctor and was diagnosed, and it was pretty like blunt. Like the doctor said, "Oh, you're gonna go blind."
Mm.
I was like, I think I was 20 years old. And I was like, "What?" And they were like, the doctor was like, "Yeah, you have this disorder, etc." And so that was pretty traumatic, let's say, as a young person to hear this news. Um, and there wasn't much follow up. There wasn't any kind of counseling or anything like that. I just kind of went home and talked to my mom about it and, was just wondering what my future would be.
Mm.
Um, that was really the beginning of my awareness and then the challenges. Um, I would say for like my mental health challenges, that started when I was very young. So when I was 5 years old, my dad passed away, and I really did not have the skills as a kid to process all of that. And and also like what was happening with my mom. I'm a kid, so it was like really hard to process what my mom was going through,
Mhm.
etc. Um, and there were things that just were not like, let's say, tended to in a healthy way for a little kid. You got to understand, this was like in the early 70s. We didn't have the sort of like psychology development that we have now, therapeutic things, all the awareness that we have. Like it's such a blessing, the conditions we have now, the awareness of those things.
Mm.
And so I just sort of went along in life. Those are the things that really started to like for me to like be with all these disabilities. And then much later on in life, sorry, this is going on, but I got several disabilities. And then I have a hearing disability, which is just tinnitus, it's just ringing in the ears, that happened over time, probably from just too much loud music exposure, not having the consciousness of wearing earplugs in loud environments like we do now, and the reduction of stage volumes, which is really good. So anyway, that's that. So can
Wow.
can you refresh or reset like your question? Because I kind of rambled on there.
No, no, this is perfect. This is perfect. As a follow-up to that, having one disability um can bring about uh different experiences for folks, obviously. Having multiple disabilities, especially in a situation as you spoke about, where you're growing up in a community that is has its own challenges. You're growing up in a situation where your mom is dealing with her own trauma, potentially, of course, with your father passing away. Um, how was it just navigating your disability with all of these other elements as a part of it? Your cultural background, your community background, and some of these other pieces.
Well, for sure it was challenging, no doubt, because I didn't have like tools or guidance initially. Um, and it was also challenging for like my family,
Mm,
to start experiencing my sight loss and the challenges that I had to like sort of like that transitional phase from when I was fairly able and active, moving around independently, to much different situations. So there were like situational conditions with RP where like the lighting really influences like what you're able to see. So at night, my capacities really would drop. Like there would be times during the daytime I could walk around fine, but at night I was
mm,
like having trouble just doing things and stuff like that. So my friends also were like they were saddened that their friend was going through this, you know what I mean? But
mm,
they were also like very supportive, and they also joked around a lot as well, which also helps kind of ease the tension of like going through difficult things. But it was very challenging.
mm,
I think the for the vision impairment, the time I started going to the Braille Institute and meeting other blind people, that's when I really started to shift
mm,
my perspective on what it meant to be a disabled person. I started encountering very well adjusted blind folks.
mm,
I started meeting blind people that were very accomplished in their lives, living very full lives, that were happy and humorous and engaged and had very full lives, were doing all kinds of things that were like, wow, you do that? Like, how can you do that? You're blind. And those sorts of things really did help me. Playing in a blind band, that was like probably one of the most healing things that really benefited me. It kind of merged two passions, um, like music and the disability. So, in that space, it's there's kind of like just direct communication. There's no visual thing
mm.
that's affecting the what you're playing musically. And it was a great training ground. These guys were so talented musically. It was a great experience to do that. So once I started realizing that it wasn't like your life isn't completely over because you have a visual impairment. And one of the greater insights that I eventually got to was to really accept where I'm at. And the way I phrase it is I stopped grasping over seeing. So those things that like would get me depressed, like reaching, like wanting to see things or do things that are sight based, um, that really helps. So, like, to stop grasping after seeing and to really just accept my realm. And one of the things that did inform me about how it is to be a being
Mm.
in the world with different senses are animals. So animals have. I started like getting really fascinated about how animals navigate in the world. Like many animals can see in other like optical dimensions,
Mm.
like they can see in like birds see a glittering realm. There, bats navigate with ultrasonic. There's fish that navigate with electromagnetic fields in the ocean. There's shrimp that see in a whole other dimension. There's all this stuff that I was like, and none of them worry about not having another ability.
Right.
Like animals on the ground don't look at birds and say, "Oh, I'm my life is over. I can't fly."
Uh-huh.
It doesn't. They just dwell in their realm and are completely able and content and
That's
just
right.
go about their life. And that really helped me kind of get grounded about being disabled.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting, I think that for me, kind of in a similar way, meeting other kids with physical disabilities who were active and engaged and high energy and fun. And for me, it was wheelchair basketball, of course, that kind of led me to that part of my community. But finding others in the disability movement, in the disability community, really kind of fired me up and got me excited to not only be active as an athlete, but also be active as an advocate with activism, community work, and just thinking about what um what can I do? What role can I play to help not only myself but others in our community? And I know that that's uh, a decision that you made very early on as well, which wasn't just about your own experience, but you started to get into community work, activism, social justice. Can you talk a little bit about your early experiences in that space as well?
Oh, sure. My family and the local Filipino community, they were very community driven. There was a real sense of that, and I grew up in it. Um, Early on, there weren't Filipino organizations, institutions. Um, they kind of just started them and built them out, and they were all most of them, from my experience, were just volunteering. And so that just became a very normal thing to do in the community was just you give of yourself and you help others and eventually I started like understanding how to build like organize and stuff. I was informed by my elders how they had their like what we term now grassroots initiatives. So I really did start in the Filipino community, and my passions started in like with most young folks, like your culture identity, etc. And so I really started diving into those sorts of things, and that led me down an amazing pathway. I started learning about my culture, and I, in like in your studies in America, it doesn't really cover that region of the world and its richness. I sort of started studying all these things and was really amazed at like the wealth of culture, philosophy, spirituality, the diversity, uh, so much of that, like really started my journey into the music of the Philippines, the martial arts of the Philippines, the cultural, spiritual practices, a whole bunch of stuff that just wasn't really um, taught in general, and was limited, let's say, within very small pockets in our community.
Hmm.
So I was lucky that on my block there were several Filipino culture bearers, and I was just sort of immersed in that uh, culture. I didn't realize how fortunate I was to be around these lineage holders of different music traditions, dance traditions, art traditions, etc.
Mm.
It was a very rare sort of like little like micro community of arts and lineage culture bearers. And so I really started studying those sorts of things and going and taking that big deep dive into it. And I can branch off into any of that if you wish.
Absolutely. Wow, that's really fantastic, Roque. And I'm wondering, you've talked about music, art, kind of stories, culture. How do you see some of these pieces connecting to disability? And I know you talked a little bit about it with the idea that some of the other experiences um, of folks can influence how we view disability and other circumstances. But what would you say about just the connection between disability and some of these other art kind of forms?
Sure. So, as a lead-in, bit of a preface,
Okay.
I was shopping in a record store back in old school, back in the day record store,
That's
World of
right.
Music, where they had all this world music
Mm,
records. Like it was literally like a couple of blocks from my house.
mm,
And I walked in there and I was just curious and I was like, oh, they got a Philippine section, right?
mm,
I was like, whoa, what's this? And I looked through the records and I was like, what? It was an album that said like Kulintang gong music from the Southern Philippines. And I was like, I had no idea what it was. I was like, what is this? There were some other modern cultural folk albums. There was like People's Army album, which is like like kind of a rebel group, or let's say social progressive political wing in the Philippines, and it had
Right.
that album. And I was just like, what is this? And I didn't buy them because I had no idea what they were. Then I kind of let it go. About a couple years later, I went to a Philippine Independence Day celebration in MacArthur Park. And this was back in the
Mhm.
day where MacArthur Park was like, oh, it was it was not a great place like it is now in
Yeah.
the year 2025.
Right.
And I was in the back, just like, what the hell am I doing here? This is an awful event. There was like all these kind of really bad political speeches, and
Mm,
I don't know. It was just I was just like, what am I doing here?
mm,
And then all of a sudden, this this guy comes out, and he looks really like dark skinned, very
mm,
indigenous looking,
mm.
and he starts setting up gongs. And then there's this beautiful woman, Filipina, comes out and starts setting up the gong. I'm like, gongs? Was like, what is this? You know? And I was like, totally like, what? Because I was a musician at that point. I was playing music, I was in
Okay.
a percussion ensemble, etc. So I was like a magnet. I went from the back of this event, way in the back towards, and I just moved up. Like I just
Mm,
kept going closer, and I just kept looking at the gongs, and then they started playing, and then I was just totally blown away
mm.
of this amazing gong drum tradition of the Southern Philippines. And I went after the set, went to the back, and I told them, "What is this? I'd love to learn this. Do you guys teach, etc."
Oh,
And that started my path down the gong music of the Southern Philippines called Kulintang. And they were in their very formative stages of starting a nonprofit, the World Kulintang Institute. And I just became a pest. And they would joke with me, who is this guy that keeps calling us about classes and stuff? And and then I was just in it. I was just in my element playing gong music from the Southern Philippines. We eventually
wow.
recorded the first gong music of this tradition on CD. Um, and I eventually ran back to that record store, and the two albums were still there. And I bought them. And
Wow.
so we started like an entire institute. So there was the World Kulintang Institute, which is in Reseda in the Valley
Mm,
in Los Angeles, teaching the music, touring the music, playing, under the Music Center on Tour program, etc. Tons of gigs, tons of cultural,
wow.
like tangents that are connected to the traditions. There's a wealth once you dive into the culture. The gongs are one aspect, and
Mm.
then all these other things just start unfolding in front of you that are connected to it, culturally speaking. And that was my deep dive. To circle back now to the disability part of this culture is also martial arts. So there's
Mm.
a martial arts tradition that has several names, but like Kali is one of the main names, Eskrima, Arnis, there's several, and they're related to the Indo-Pacific Islander martial tradition. So they're connected to Indonesia, the Silat tradition, and also to southern India, the Kalari Pait tradition of southern India. These are
Oh,
very deeply connected stylistically and traditionally and culturally. And so as a person who was very conscious that I was gonna be losing my eyesight because I was already having poor eyesight, I wanted to really dive into the martial arts while I could
mm.
still see. And so I practiced as a visually impaired person a very sophisticated, let's say, martial style that involved like sticks, knife fighting, sword play, etc.,
Wow.
which really required a lot of visual acuity. And I was trained against able-bodied, fully sighted folks, and they became my cohort. And I really did get to an accomplished level in that. And and I knew that that would also be of great benefit because I knew at some point I'd be walking around with a cane, you know,
That's right. That's right.
yeah, exactly. And so I was like, this is so ideal for a person that eventually be dependent upon a cane for their life, really. And it really did help my mobility.
Wow.
I'm really good with my cane skills because of that, like that background, that
Mm.
awareness, the full capacity that I have with my cane. So that's just a neat little bow on that.
Wow. Well, that's really, really fascinating. And I have to believe the other folks who were in your cohort and just around who got to witness um, the passion and energy that you brought to uh, to the martial arts and um, just like how good you were at it. I'm sure that it carried a lot for them to go back to their communities, go back to their families and otherwise, and just be thoughtful about having somebody with a disability included in our team or on our cohort or part of our culture is important because they bring things that maybe otherwise we wouldn't have had. So I think I have to believe that made a major difference on a lot of those folks' experiences as well.
Sure did, and also my colleagues, my friends, my musician friends, my martial friends. To also, it was challenging for them to experience my diminishing eyesight over time.
Mm.
You know, and they were still very supportive of me. You know, understanding, let's say. But it was also challenging, to see someone so, let's say, capable and then starting to diminish in like eyesight abilities. Um, those sorts of things were very I learned a lot about how to be in the
Mm.
world as a visually impaired person. That was really a transformative time in my life. I'd say yeah, that was really quite amazing. Yeah, yeah, and just as a side note, I eventually started training at the blind dojo after my eyesight
Wow.
really started going down. So I have that as my part of my background. That was where the Paralympic judo players in Los Angeles trained. So I got to play with them. Yeah, that was a great time.
Wow, that's interesting. And I know, something that just came to mind, of course, as folks live longer, acquiring disability is just part of the our lifespan. Um, and having vision loss, especially as you get a little bit older, um, a lot of people will try to do everything they can to either deny that it's happening,
Mm.
um, or or otherwise, they'll let me do anything else besides, uh, have to either have a cane or use any other types of support. What would you say to somebody, and of course this happened to you, your disability early in your life, but what would you say to folks who are navigating maybe a little bit later in life or any point in their life, um, about, especially vision loss and kind of, uh, as they uh, grow and get older?
Oh, sure. Yes, I completely understand this, having experience with other folks, just sharing like the journey. I'd say one of the main things is to be free of shame.
Mm,
Um, there's lots of folks that like they have a certain sense of ego and pride about how they are as an able-bodied, quote unquote, person. And then there's some stigma to now being a disabled person, someone that may be reliant on a mobility device, et cetera, or an assistive technology,
mm,
whatever it might be. Um, and being free from that takes a lot of interior, internal, personal work. Now there's great support services for that.
mhm.
But I'd say that's one of the primary things to let go of that. Like I went through that myself. Like uh, uh, they call it passing,
Yeah.
meaning you're trying to pass as a sighted person, and you're trying to just make it through. And that would happen to me, like I mentioned, like when it got dark.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be using a cane because during the day I was still able to walk around, etc., and get around. But then at night, like my eyesight wouldn't be as good, but I was like hiding the fact and not using a cane
Mm,
when I should have and really did need it. And this is something I didn't realize till later in life. Others around me would have benefited from that.
mm, mm,
They would, because people looked at me like, why is he odd like that? Why is he moving around in a weird way? This guy's weird or something.
mm, mm.
I'm not weird. I was just going through my disability, but I didn't have the evolved skill set to disclose it yet.
Right.
So that part of it, I'd say, is one of the primary hurdles. Um, and then, um, like I mentioned earlier, not to grasp after what you're not any longer.
Mm, mm,
That's a tough thing for many folks, because let's say people who got became disabled over a traumatic incident. Like I've been around lots of folks who've had accidents and
yeah.
been in different kinds of things like that where it was traumatic. On some level, it 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 it's even easier than a slower degradation because you just have to accept the fact all of a sudden, like you've been in an accident, here you are. But folks that have a disability where it's gradual, that can be even more challenging because you're used to just being so able-bodied and you're still trying to grasp after what you once were, et cetera, et cetera. That's just like the martial arts thing. Like I
Mm,
started, like when I went to the blind dojo, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of blind martial artists here. They're totally fine, and damn, can they fight?
mm,
Like so. Uh, yeah, I would say those sorts of things like that. And for sure, like uh, trying to reach out and being around your new community.
yeah.
So, like I mentioned earlier, being around blind folks, that kind of support, even if it's indirect, not like in a peer support group or a formal therapeutic setting, but just being around folks like that to talk, who are living their lives, just,
That's
doing
right.
their things, etc., having fun, like, just all that. That is such a transformative environment to be in and very healing.
Mm,
Um, and I would say those things, yes.
absolutely. No, I appreciate that, Roque. Um, so we're gonna switch gears just a little bit, back to kind of your statewide advocacy,
Mm.
and some of the spaces that you hold on boards, councils, commissions. I think folks who are listening and checking this out uh, can tell that you're involved. You could be involved in so many different things in terms of your music, art, spirituality, martial arts, et cetera, et cetera. You spend a whole heck of a lot of time, helping the community, doing statewide advocacy. Can you talk a little bit about, um, why you think that's so important and what you think we as a disability community can do during these times? It's challenging at the federal level, challenging in some ways, of course, at the state level, local levels. What would you say as an advocate who's chosen to do this? What would you say to our community on ways that we can kind of lean in and hopefully improve our situation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I was really grounded in community service as a young person. And as that extended out and we built these things out culturally, um, it just became a normal thing to me to tend to my community, whatever that meant. And very early on, it was in the Filipino community, but it started to expand. And through my journey, I was very conscious about like how RP affects your life curve in
Mhm.
terms of eyesight. So I knew I wanted to do certain things as a young person while I still had some visual capacity. But later I knew deep down I also wanted to broaden what that community meant to me as a person with a disability. So I knew later on in my life, as my eyesight shifted, I wanted to really start to embrace the disabled part of my being and extend my service to the my disabled community.
Mhm.
So I really started doing things for the blind community, working in that sector at first because I was so, let's say, connected to that part of my disability. I then started working in the mental health sector because
Mhm.
a friend of mine encouraged me to get connected to the LA County Department of Mental Health. They were starting a um, disability advisory council, which is now named Access for All.
Mhm.
And that was a really good uh, place for me to start expanding, like, let's say, moving out of the silo of the visual impaired community,
Mhm.
expanding outward into just disability and disability, including mental health, because I experienced those mental health challenges
Yeah.
going through my disability journey. And I knew that there were others that may be also struggling, and I encountered them, in this disability advisory committee, and they were also talking about things like equity in services, like the discrepancies in the services that were available to people with disabilities, the lack of cultural etiquette
Mhm.
amongst therapeutic practitioners, etc. And I really was like, well, let's transform that. Let's really work out. Let's get them accountable. Let's make these changes manifest and come into being so that we have a uh, better conditions for all of us. I grew up prior to the Rehabilitation Act and the ADA.
That's right.
So I kind of know what it was like. Like I didn't have these accommodations when I went to school. It
Mhm.
was really challenging. Like I was staring at the chalkboard, like the chalkboard, a visually impaired person trying to keep up in a classroom. Like what, you know,
Yeah.
it's so different now.
Yeah.
It's so the conditions are so much better on so many levels, like the assistive technology, etc. It's amazing. and so I do understand what those challenges are and what it means to fight for those sorts of things. Um, I didn't have that kind of language back in the day. We didn't have, like accommodations, like that just was not a term, you know. Um, and so I I do recognize the our prior leaders that brought about the Rehabilitation Act, Americans with Disabilities Act. I've met some of them now who are, or some of, like, they're very inspiring to be
Yeah.
around, because they talk about like what they had to go through, what they did, the initiatives, like, and even till this day they continue all that work. I'm in awe, and just inspired by their stories and their current accomplishments and what they actually do.
Hmm.
Those sorts of things really informed me, and I just wanted to continue that. And on a very deep level, like in terms of advocacy, we're speaking up for those who don't have a voice, or don't have the energetic capacity to do that, for
Yeah.
whatever reason that is. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, you're dealing with your stuff
Yeah.
and it's a bit overwhelming. Totally understandable. You got a lot going on.
That's right.
But there are those that have gone through the journey and are maybe better able at a certain time to speak about these things, and then like really do advocacy on the behalf of the community. And I do understand that. I was schooled through my elders in the Filipino community. They were very tough on us and called us out on a lot of stuff, like that we were not skilled in certain areas, we didn't have emotional maturity, we didn't have spiritual grounding, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so I know it takes a bit of time to cultivate those skills. And I'm always, um, uh, uh, I let's say I love being around the disabled leadership community, because I understand that journey. I understand and appreciate all the things that they are able to do, and how fierce and ferocious some of them are, and how talented and skilled they are in order to go through all the various pathways in order to improve the conditions for people with disabilities. During these times, it's very challenging to view opposition as, your brothers and sisters, because they're opposing certain services or funding, and you can view them as like opposition per se, um, or those with negative views. So I try to really work on the issues themselves, and to dissolve, like, let's say, political bias,
Mm.
which is not easy to do these days, um, racial bias, um, economic biases. I really try to ground myself in humanity. Like, this is a human thing.
Yeah.
These are people that need compassion, care, etc., and thoroughly ground myself there. And it's like our brothers and sisters who are on the streets.
Yeah.
Most of them have disabilities. I think of it as a disabilities issue, like compounded upon by being unhoused.
Yeah.
That they are trying to tend to themselves in any which way, meaning like maybe self-medicating, etc., trying to find some kind of relief. I don't blame them in that regard, or look down upon them for trying to find some relief, trying to find some peace in a very challenging experience, um, going through uh, a very challenging environment to navigate,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Repeated traumas, etc., and trying to heal through that. They just build upon themselves, and so that's where advocacy comes in. We're working to really improve their conditions as best we can.
That's right.
Um, that when faced with, let's say, policies that impede their well-being, that's where like I think we need to stand up, rally folks across the aisle, look at our common humanity, and tend to people as best we can. So I'll pause it there just to reset.
No, I really appreciate, those points, Roque, and I feel like, as a colleague and friend of yours now for years, I can say thank you for all the work that you do and the way, and not just the work that you do, but how you do it. You always do it in a way that is welcoming, do it in a way that is inclusive of all people's kind of ideas, backgrounds. And I think that's what we need more than ever during these times. And so I just, want to appreciate you for doing what you do, how you do it. It's been wonderful to collaborate and to watch you do amazing things. But doing it with grace is always something that I've been able to respect.
Thank you for those very kind words. Thank you so much. I would say one of the keys for me is really listening to the community and what they're expressing and trying to assist them in achieving, let's say, their aim or goal. I learned that through trial and fire in the Filipino community and building out a festival and an associated nonprofit with that. We were running the largest Filipino cultural festival for many years. A shout out to FPAC, the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture,
Mm.
just recently having its plus 30th year of production, so it's still up and
Wow.
running. And um, the, um, but that experience really taught me how to listen and um, uh, let's say uh, integrate, engage, and attend to how the community wants to express itself in its fullest way. That experience really helped me, um, let's say, facilitate like a
Mm.
meeting. To listen to what the community is saying, to understand that like uh, an attack or a harsh criticism was a learning moment for that body, that committee, etc., on how to address the real passion. The folks like that express themselves in, let's say, challenging ways are very passionate about an issue. And so, listening to their passion and trying to guide it, support it, so that their aims and outcomes um, become beneficial to the community. That's a real goal, and I'm really thankful for my community experience and being able to uh, facilitate that. And a lot of things just start unfolding on their own once people have their own space to express these sorts of things. Things start building out on their own. There's a different culture that gets established, meaning the community starts to realize their voice is being heard,
Mm.
and they and then also giving them the responsibility. So that's the other side of it. It's like, okay, you asked for this, so now you got to do it.
That's right.
You got to actually do the work now. You wanted this, right? So also putting them, like holding them accountable, and not just making it a one-way thing. Like, oh, you just provide service to us and that's it. No, you want this. You have your areas of responsibility as well. So
That's right.
all those sorts of skills are how I move through like our, let's say, dialogue in the community.
Wow, fantastic. Well, we're gonna start closing up now. I can't finish a conversation with you without a couple of things though. And you probably know where I'm going, but Dodgers are still playing. The LA Dodgers, of course, and the LA Lakers season is about to begin. What are your thoughts as we kind of get to the end of baseball season and then during basketball season?
Yes, I am definitely a sports fan. And being from LA, these are my favorite hometown teams. Um, the Dodgers are it it it's amazing how good a team they are because they're facing like a better team technically, like
Mhm.
the Philadelphia Phillies. Um, it reminds me of the prior season when they faced like their toughest opponent getting to the World Series, which was the San Diego Padres.
Yeah.
It I think the Phillies are really the a really challenging team, and the the skill of Dave Roberts in managing his pitching staff, not just the bullpen, because he's been using his starters in the pen, which is like it's a really let's say novel approach. I think he's been one of those innovators of like there's a starter kind of pitcher, and then he
Right,
uses
right.
all that. So a very progressive view on using the arms that he's got and not just traditional roles. And well, obviously he can't rely upon them because the pen bullpen, the pitchers have been pretty shaky prior to the playoffs.
That's
And
right.
for the Lakers, oh my gosh, it's a whole new season, a whole new transformation. We're right on the cusp. I don't know. Is LeBron like going to retire? Like, he had this like kind of 10-second advert, or I don't know. It's amazing. And then this whole new era of Luca, and it's beautiful. They're inspired. It's a really beautiful thing to marvel at our human capacities in all kinds of ways, in arts and in sports. And I just enjoy that. And how about you, my friend? What
Oh
teams are
man.
you?
I refuse to talk about it, you know? It's funny because I'm excited for basketball season. It's always going to be my favorite season in terms of the sport itself. But I just sport and creativity and great athletes is what I enjoy. Unfortunately, most of my teams are not are not doing particularly well. But the finish of the WNBA season, coming to a close right now with the Las Vegas Aces and the Phoenix Mercury. You have the NBA season about to start here shortly. So I'm just enjoying as much as I can. Tennis, all these different sports are fun for me. So it's all been uh, an enjoyable experience. And to finish off the show, Roque, if you could put together a short game plan, the show, of course, is called The Game Plan. If you could put a game plan out there for our community, and you've talked about this throughout, but just anything that you want to finish on as a game plan going into 2026.
Sure. I'd say one of the things that I would want to build out or work on is how we can uh, develop a best practices for navigating social media, like how to fact check things like that. It's sort of the parallel concept is like sort of the know your rights card,
Mm-hmm.
for like immigrant communities right now that are being stressed
Yes.
by ICE raids, etc. And they don't know what their rights are, but they need kind of like a guide um, because I think it's sort of like a pathogen
Mm.
um, that goes through social media that really um, impacts the way people think and their views, and that's really important to tend to protect, help guide. Um, and it's just to I think there's a thing to help improve the discernment amongst the community and how to better navigate these murky waters. You go down rabbit holes and all kinds of stuff, and it's very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Um, and um, so that's one. Um, the other thing that I would like, these are kind of related things, is how we leverage our disability think tanks, those like policy institutes, et cetera, for people with
That's right.
disabilities, and the imbalance of the disability lobbying.
Mhm.
Um, um, are you a certified lobbyist?
I am. Yes.
You are. So, see, so I think about like how to build out like a, a pipeline
Mhm.
for folks to start engaging in all the various sectors that disabled folks need to lobby, because we're
Mhm.
sort of imbalanced. We're up against it, as you know. There's
Yeah.
people don't even turn to us about disability issues. They just make policies
That's right.
for us. And uh, uh, that sort of thing I think is important to build out. What sort of pathways are needed to cultivate those, like in what sectors need to be disability sectors in particular need to get represented so that we get a bit of equity. And I also know that part of that is also like the capacity building to support those endeavors. So leveraging like the funds to support um, uh, various, let's say, um, issues that need the attention by the community. So, like, let's say, building out a pipeline, like how to cultivate the youth and share with them what's needed in order to really make change in terms of policy, the capacity building, like how to leverage the community's uh, financial capacity to help support these endeavors, like the pulling the funds together to build out our service networks, et cetera. Especially now in the face of cuts and et cetera, there's a lot of the community that could experience hardship because of the challenges of navigating the bureaucracies,
Mhm.
um, uh, uh, trying to figure out like sophisticated policy things, like just reading documents is like hard to interpret. It's almost like you need an interpreter for those documents, you're like, what is this in plain language?
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's exactly right.
and that's where just a couple of my thoughts.
No, I really appreciate it, Roque, and we are so grateful for all that you do, and so grateful for you being a guest on the Game Plan with Disability Rights California. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I think your ideas for how we can improve our circumstances and make sure our community has as strong of a voice as we can are right on point. You know, the role that policy plays, the role that our community members play. We all need to kind of join together in this push, and in all honesty, for in this fight, to make sure that our community is has what we need, has the rights that we deserve, and that our community continues to fight for. So really grateful for you, Roque.
Thank you. I really do appreciate this. Maraming salamat po. Thank you so much to DRC. Thanks to Sam producing in the background, egging me on to be in this podcast because I was like, oh, why me? I really do thank you all. I deeply appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Roque.
This has been The Game Plan, a production of Disability Rights California. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the platform of your choice. See you next time.